Today we're going to be going through 3 disturbing stories. The first one is about diving, the second one is about caving and swimming, and the third story is about cave diving. They're all true, and they're all accidents. If you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know that most of the stories I cover usually take place quite a long time ago. On the other hand, this first one we're going to get into happened in Belgium only a few months ago, January 4th, 2024. This incident focuses on 2 divers that were originally from Liege, Belgium, but today they headed down to the Plate-Taille reservoir for a recreational nighttime dive. This was about 110 kilometers from their hometown. The 350-hectare Plate-Taille reservoir is just one of a chain of 5 artificial lakes, which make up the Ouder lake complex. Together, these 5 lakes form Belgium's biggest lake chain. It has 5 dams distributed throughout the system, and it has its own hydroelectric power station. This area is also known as a popular scuba diving attraction, which is equipped with its own dive center. They started their dive at 5 p.m., at a time where the dive center was closed. It was said that the area that they were diving in was prohibited due to how close it was to the dam. Some believe they chose that time because they were well aware that they weren't supposed to be there. They were diving in a restricted area nearer to the hydroelectric power station, so some have speculated that they chose this later time because it would have likely meant there would be lower demand for the turbines positioned not far away from them. Well, they weren't that close, but what's considered not far away when something can create that much of a current? A current that you wouldn't be able to swim out of no matter how hard you tried. With a current like that, you likely want to be as far away from it as you possibly can be. That night, 2 of the 3 turbines had been running. Some of the comments online state that there isn't very much public information available to warn that turbines can come on at any time near to where people commonly dive. So even if they were aware that they weren't supposed to be diving there, they might not have been aware of the high chances of the extremely powerful turbines turning on while they were in the water. Because of the time, they might have assumed the chances of that were either very low or non-existent. Later on that night, one of the man's sons began to worry about the lack of contact with his father. Feeling nervous about all of this, he went down to where his dad was supposed to be. He would find his father's truck still sitting in the lake's parking lot, and the search would begin the next day. With the assistance of sonar, 10 divers would search for the men. That day, they would only find badly damaged equipment, and the next day they focused downstream of the dam. They would find body parts and remains of 2 individuals which forensic examination determined to be the 2 missing men. Based on the findings, authorities believe that they were diving in prohibited areas, swam too close to the dam's intake, and the powerful current dragged them into the turbine system. The intake tunnel begins at about 50 meters down and it can reach to a depth of 70 meters. Apparently, when you're in the water, you can hear the loud turbines working away in the background. Essentially, they were in the water at night. They began to feel an extremely strong current that they couldn't swim out of, even with the assistance of the dive scooters that they reportedly had with them. Against their power, they were pulled down into the cold darkness. They were sucked down into a massive long tube being bashed around as they hopelessly hurtled down inside of it. They were pulled deeper and deeper as they heard the sounds of the turbine increasing in volume until it was so unbearably loud that in an instant the sound came to a stop, as they ceased to hear or feel anything else at all. In Provo, Utah, sometime in August of 2005, 5 friends would hike their way up to Y Mountain to a cave that had some interesting qualities to it. The entrance looks like nothing more than a small dark hole camouflaged into the side of the mountain. Some locals know of the cave well. It's actually an old mine shaft with water flowing through it, which doesn't sound all that special, but the inside of the cave is where it gets interesting. The group began their hike at 3 a.m. and they reached the entrance of the cave at 4:30. This is where one of their friends decided they would sit this one out. They sat outside and watched as the other 4 began to crawl their way into the cave. Once inside the cave, they would travel about 50 to 90 feet until they would reach a fork in the cave that led into 2 different directions. The group had come all that way because the left side path had a unique water feature to it. They walked down the wet path until they found a small water-filled hole in the ground. This hole led to a long underwater tunnel. If you swam down and forward for 15 feet, you would find another hole directly above you. And when you emerge, you would be in a neat little pocket of cave that's said to be large enough to hold 8 people. The tunnel also had a rope lining the inside to guide you as you swam. The only things they would have to worry about is overcoming the fear of how dark and narrow the underwater tunnel was, whether or not they could stay calm in the freezing cold water, and how long they could all hold their breath. One by one, all 4 of them went down and began their swim. It seems as if they were all successful making the first trip, but on the way back, things didn't go according to plan. Fast forward, 45 minutes have passed. Their friend that was waiting on the outside for them to return started to realize that things weren't right. After calling a bunch of friends who were familiar with the cave, at 6:25 a.m., in a panic, they called the police. The water had become such a hazard that rescue crews had to pump water out of the cave before they could even begin searching. While they did this, they pumped fresh air back into the cave just in case the ones inside were running out of air. That is, if any one of them were still left alive. The rescuers weren't familiar with the cave, so as to not endanger themselves in the process, they had to move slowly and carefully. Because of this, it took almost 4 hours after the original call to even find anyone inside. And unfortunately, the first person that they found wasn't alive. The one that they found was submerged in the tunnel, and they'd soon find out that every other person was stuck behind them. The rescuers speculated that they had all drowned on the way back, because they were all facing the same way. Out of all the 4 people that were found in the tunnel, 2 were floating, 1 was on the ground, and the one in front seemed to have trapped the rest from escaping. Some people who've experienced the cave know that if you keep going past the hole by accident, a few feet past the exit, there's a dead end. I think it's safe to assume not everybody knows of that detail because you most likely have to have had a near-death experience to even know about it. Maybe that's what happened to the one blocking the exit. Maybe all they did was just swim a little too far, and before they knew it, their exit had seemingly disappeared, along with their life and the lives of the unknowing friends following behind them. The night before all of this, it's said that the group of friends had jokingly referred to the cave as the Cave of Death. If only that statement hadn't become a reality. May 26th, 2023, Jackson Blue Springs, Florida. Jackson Blue Springs is a stunning park where people can come to swim, hang out and enjoy the sun, and if you really wanted to, you could even go for some cave diving. The cave entrance there is 40 feet down, and it's estimated to be almost 28,000 feet in length. I couldn't find a more recent source, but by 2018 there was already 50,000 feet of explored tunnels and passageways. Some have even went as far as nearly 15,000 feet from the entrance during a single dive. It's needless to say that the cave is pretty massive. Given the proper training, beginners would do just fine in the earlier portions of the cave, but you better be an expert if you plan to go as far as some of those other divers. A man named Benjamin Strelnick would venture into the cave that day with his fellow friend and coworker. They did all their necessary pre-dive checks, made sure they were good to go, and began their dive down to the entrance. There's an obvious main passageway when exploring the cave, but there are many smaller chutes leading off in different directions all throughout. A lot of them aren't even marked on the map, so if you aren't careful, even with experience, it could be easy to get stuck in some of these tighter restrictions. To assist with navigation, guidelines line the cave leading off into different already surveyed sections. But don't let the safety of the guideline get you complacent. There's still many other things to watch out for as you explore any underwater cave. One of the main concerns, especially in a limestone cave like this, you don't want to touch any of the walls. Cave divers have to swim in a way that doesn't accidentally kick up any silt. This silt spreads around and creates a sheet that you can't see through. Your light would also reflect back off of it, making it even worse. Like driving in heavy fog with your high beams on, you wouldn't be able to see anything. Cave diving. It's a fun pastime, yes, and it doesn't need to be scary if you know what you're doing. but as a diver, you always have to stay alert. Sometimes, though, regardless of your experience or training, regardless of whether or not you made all of the correct decisions, sometimes things just don't go as planned. Ben was in front, and as they were swimming through the cave, he saw an interesting looking side tunnel that he wanted to explore. This tunnel wasn't all that far into the cave, and even though it had a guideline, it wasn't actually marked on the map. The passageway was pretty silted out. I don't know if it was the presence of the guideline that influenced his decision. Maybe it gave the illusion of safety, even with the silt. But he must have felt comfortable enough to go forward, because he entered the small area anyway, even though he couldn't see that far. Because of the low visibility, he didn't realize that the cave was actually closing in on him. It was getting narrower as he pushed himself forward, and he only realized once it was too late. He was now wedged in a small tunnel underwater. It was so small that he didn't have room to turn around, and the decisions of him and his partner are unknown. But what was clear is that Ben couldn't get out by himself, and there wasn't much that his partner could do to help either. After some time had passed, realizing nothing could be done, his partner sadly had to leave Ben there so they could go get help, and at the very least, save themselves. The police were called and they contacted Ed Sorensen for help in the rescue. Ed Sorensen is widely known in the diving community. He has helped and rescued many lost or trapped cave divers. He's made countless contributions to the safety of diving as a whole, and he is known for being one of the most experienced cave divers in the world. Sadly, when they finally got to Ben, he had already passed away. Ben was found with quite a lot of air left, but he was in such a tight restriction that some have the understanding that he wasn't able to reach the tank to be able to utilize it. The intense stress of the situation could have also caused such a panic that would have eventually led to him drowning. These theories are all just speculation. All we really know is that things went horribly wrong and Ben isn't here anymore. Referring to the dangers that surround the reality of scuba diving, here are some words that Ben once told his mother. "If I died diving, at least know that I died happy."